Hi, this is Brad, and welcome to Brad English Podcast, your daily English listening podcast helping you speak English naturally. On the 14th of February 2026, a man named Daniel Bauer, who was 31 years old and had been studying English for 9 years in Munich, Germany, sat down at a cafe table across from a colleague from the United States who had just arrived for a joint project. The colleague smiled, ordered a coffee, and then asked Daniel the single most common question in the English language. So, tell me about yourself. Daniel had a university degree in English linguistics from Ludwig Maximilian University. He had passed the Cambridge C1 advanced examination with a grade of B. He had read hundreds of English novels, and in that moment, with the cafe noise around him, and the American colleague waiting with genuine, friendly interest, every sentence Daniel knew disappeared. The silence lasted 11 seconds. He counted them afterward. 11 seconds that felt like 11 minutes. Today, this episode is for Daniel, and for every person who has lived some version of that moment. There is a very specific reason why this happens, and there is one skill that fixes it completely. That skill is not grammar, not vocabulary, not pronunciation. It is something that almost no English teacher ever explicitly teaches, and understanding it will change the way you learn English from this moment forward. Let us find out what it is. What happened to Daniel in that Munich cafe in February 2026 has a name in linguistics. It is called the production gap, and it describes the very common and very frustrating situation where a learner's ability to receive and understand English dramatically outpaces their ability to produce it spontaneously in real time. Daniel could read an English news article and understand 90% of it. He could watch an English film with the subtitles off and follow the plot completely. He could listen to this podcast right now and understand every word. But when he opened his mouth to produce English under the mild social pressure of a real conversation, the system failed. The production gap is not a vocabulary problem. It is not a grammar problem. It is a processing speed problem. Here is the most important thing to understand about spoken language production, and it is something that very few people outside academic linguistics ever think about clearly. When you produce a sentence in your first language, you do not consciously compose it. The sentence simply arrives, already formed, already correct, already shaped to the social moment, in a fraction of a second. You do not choose the word order. You do not select the verb tense. You do not decide whether to use a question form or a statement. The language appears automatically, the way a movement appears when you reach for a glass of water. First language production is automatic in exactly this way, and that automaticity is what second language learners are working toward. For Daniel, and for most English learners at the A2-B1 level, English production is not yet automatic. It is manual. Every sentence requires a sequence of conscious decisions: what to say, how to structure it, which words to choose, whether the grammar is acceptable, whether the pronunciation is close enough, and whether the sentence fits the social moment. All of these decisions happen in sequence, not in parallel, and they take time. In a real conversation, there is almost no time. The production gap is the distance between the time these manual decisions take and the time a natural conversation allows. And it is experienced as silence, as freezing, as the feeling that your English has disappeared completely. The emotional consequence of the production gap is often as damaging as the practical one. After Daniel's 11-second silence in the Munich cafe in February 2026, he told a close friend that he felt he had undone 9 years of work in 11 seconds. That feeling is deeply unfair to him because, of course, 9 years of work had not been undone. What had been revealed was simply the gap between knowledge and production speed. But the emotional experience of that gap can lead learners to withdraw from English situations, to avoid conversations, to retreat into passive study, where they will not be exposed and embarrassed. Avoidance makes the production gap worse, not better. The production gap is not an accident or a personal failing. It is, in large part, a direct consequence of how most people are taught English. The dominant method of English instruction worldwide focuses almost exclusively on reception and accuracy. Reception means understanding input, reading texts, listening to audio, answering comprehension questions. Accuracy means producing correct forms, filling grammar exercises, writing essays, choosing the right word from a list. Both reception and accuracy are genuinely important, but neither of them is the same as spontaneous spoken production under real communicative pressure, and almost no classroom time is dedicated to practicing that specific skill. Think about what a typical English lesson looks like. A teacher presents a grammar rule. Students do exercises applying the rule. The teacher corrects the exercises. Students may do a short speaking activity where they use the new structure in a controlled way. Nothing in that sequence trains the student to produce language spontaneously under unpredictable social conditions. Daniel spent 9 years in classrooms and online courses like this across Bavaria, and later at a language institute in the Maxvorstadt district of Munich, and his English knowledge grew enormously, while his spontaneous production speed barely changed. A woman named Claire Whitfield, who is 34 years old and lives in Adelaide, Australia, spent 3 years studying French in traditional evening classes before she discovered the production gap concept in early 2026. She described her learning experience this way. I felt like I was building a beautiful house but forgetting to put in the doors. I had all the rooms, I had the walls, the roof, the windows, but I could not get in and out of the building quickly. The doors were missing. Claire's metaphor is almost perfect. Grammar knowledge is the rooms. Vocabulary is the furniture. Spontaneous production speed is the doors. Without the doors, you cannot actually live in the house. The tragedy of the production gap is that it is entirely fixable, and the fix requires no new grammar knowledge, no new vocabulary study, and no expensive courses. It requires only one specific type of practice, applied daily with consistency and intention. That practice is the subject of Part 2, and what you are about to hear may be the single most useful thing you have encountered in your English learning journey. But first, let me ask you to think about the last time your English stopped working in a real conversation. Hold that memory, because we are going to use it in Part 3 to build something completely different. Now you understand the production gap. You know it is real, you know why it exists, and you know that it has nothing to do with your intelligence or your dedication. But the question everyone asks at this point is the same. If grammar and vocabulary are not the answer, what is? That question has one specific answer, and it is coming right now in Part 2. Do not skip ahead. The context I am going to give you first is what will make the method actually work. The hidden skill that fixes the production gap is called fluency practice, and it is different from accuracy practice in one crucial and defining way. During fluency practice, correctness is deliberately suspended. You practice speaking English at full speed, without stopping to correct mistakes, without going back to fix errors, without pausing to find the right word. You keep moving forward, always forward. The goal is not to produce perfect English. The goal is to produce fast English, continuous English, English that flows rather than stalls. Stalls means stops moving. Over time, fast and continuous English becomes accurate English as well, because the brain learns from the patterns it produces at speed. But accuracy must come second. Fluency must come first. The reason fluency practice is almost never taught in classrooms is partly historical and partly cultural. The grammar translation method, which has dominated English teaching since the 19th century, treats every mistake as a problem to be corrected immediately. This makes sense in a written context, where accuracy is genuinely the most important thing, but it is deeply counterproductive in a spoken context, where stopping to correct mid-sentence actually trains the brain to monitor and interrupt itself. An English teacher in Vancouver, Canada, named Nadia Rousseau, has been teaching this distinction to her adult learners since February 2026, and she describes it this way. I tell my students that fluency practice and accuracy practice are two different gyms. You do not do heavy lifting and yoga in the same session. They train different things. You need both, but you need to know which one you are doing at any given moment. The science behind fluency practice connects directly to what neuroscientists call automatization, the process by which a complex cognitive task, through repeated practice, shifts from requiring conscious attention to requiring almost none. Automatization is why you no longer have to think consciously about balancing when you walk, or about the sequence of movements when you drive a familiar road, or about the letters when you type your own name. Spoken language in your first language is automatic for the same reason. Fluency practice, specifically the act of speaking English at speed without self-correction, is what triggers automatization in your second language. The beautiful thing about fluency practice is that it requires absolutely no special equipment, no teacher, no conversation partner, and no additional vocabulary. You can do it anywhere, at any time, with whatever English you already have. Daniel, when he discovered fluency practice in March 2026, 1 month after his 11-second moment in the Munich cafe, began practicing in his car on the drive to his office in the Schwabing district. He would speak English out loud, continuously, without stopping for the entire 25-minute commute, about his day, about the traffic on the Leopoldstrasse, about a film he had watched, about a problem at work. It did not matter what. What mattered was the forward momentum, continuously, without stopping. When a fluent English speaker is in a conversation, their brain is not processing language the way a non-fluent speaker's brain is. Research into the neurolinguistics of speech production, including studies published by the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics in Nijmegen, Netherlands, in 2025 and 2026, shows that fluent speakers begin preparing the next part of a sentence while they are still saying the previous part. This is called parallel processing, and it is what creates the seamless, uninterrupted flow of fluent speech. Non-fluent speakers, by contrast, process sequentially. Finish one thought, then start planning the next. The gap between those two processes is exactly the gap that Daniel experienced in the Munich cafe in February 2026. Fluent speakers also use a technique that linguists call formulaic language, pre-assembled chunks of language that have been heard and used so many times that they function as single units rather than collections of individually chosen words. Phrases like, "to be honest with you," and "at the end of the day," and "what I mean is," and "I was wondering if," are formulaic chunks. When a fluent speaker says, "I was wondering if you could help me with something," they are not assembling those words individually in real time. The whole chunk arrives as a unit, quickly and automatically, freeing up processing capacity for the specific content that follows. Building a large repertoire of formulaic chunks is one of the fastest routes to fluency that linguistics has ever identified. Claire Whitfield, in Adelaide, began studying formulaic language in March 2026 after reading about this research, and her experience confirmed what the research predicts. Within 4 weeks of deliberately learning and practicing conversational English chunks, her speaking speed increased measurably. "It felt like I had suddenly found a shortcut," she said. "Instead of building every sentence from scratch, I had pieces that were already built. I just had to slot in the specific content I needed." The metaphor of slotting in content is exactly right. Formulaic language provides the frame, and your own specific meaning fills it in. You now know the hidden skill, and you know the science behind it. Part 3 is where we build it. I am going to give you a specific daily practice and a 7-minute technique that you can start using today with the English you already have, with no additional materials needed. What comes next is the part that actually changes things. Do not stop now. The daily fluency practice is simple to describe and requires only 2 things: your voice and a topic. Every day, once a day, you speak English out loud for a minimum of 5 minutes without stopping, without correcting yourself, without pausing for more than 3 seconds at any point. If you lose a word, use a different word. If your grammar is wrong, keep going. If you lose your train of thought, describe the fact that you lost your train of thought in English and then continue. The only rule is forward momentum. Always forward, never back. The content can be anything: what you did today, what you plan to do tomorrow, your opinion on something you read, a memory from your childhood, a description of your room, the plot of a film you saw last week. The topic is irrelevant. The momentum is everything. What makes this practice work is consistency rather than duration. 5 minutes every day for 30 days is far more effective than 35 minutes once a week, because automatization is built through frequency of exposure and frequency of production, not through marathon sessions. Daniel began with 5 minutes per day during his March 2026 drive to his office in the Schwabing district of Munich. By the end of the first week, he noticed that the silences within his 5-minute sessions were getting shorter. By the end of the second week, the content was flowing more naturally from one topic to the next, without the jarring transitions he had experienced in the first few days. By the end of the month, he extended his sessions to 10 minutes because 5 minutes had started to feel too short. Alongside the daily fluency session, it is enormously effective to build what language researchers call a chunk bank, a personal collection of formulaic English phrases that you deliberately learn and practice until they become automatic. Start with 20 chunks. Write them in a notebook or a phone notes app. Read through them every morning for 30 seconds. Use at least 2 of them consciously in your fluency practice session every day. Useful starter chunks for conversational English include, to be completely honest with you. And what I find interesting about this is, and I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently, and the thing that surprised me most was, and at some point, I realized that each of these chunks is a doorway into a longer sentence. And once the door is familiar, walking through it becomes effortless. The emotional side of this practice is important to acknowledge because the first few fluency sessions will almost certainly feel uncomfortable. They will feel wrong, your grammar will be messy, your vocabulary will be limited, your sentences will be incomplete. This is not failure. This is exactly what the practice is supposed to feel like in the beginning, because you are training a system that has never been trained before. Think of it like a new running route along the Isar River in Munich that starts uncomfortable and becomes easier with every time you run it. The route does not change. You do. And you change because you run it again and again, even when it is hard. The 7-minute technique is an advanced version of the daily fluency practice that adds a specific structure designed to train 3 critical conversational skills simultaneously: topic initiation, topic development, and topic closing. These are the 3 movements of every natural conversation. And most English learners practice none of them deliberately. Topic initiation is how you start talking about something. Topic development is how you keep a conversation going beyond the first sentence. Topic closing is how you bring a point to a satisfying conclusion and transition naturally to the next one. The 7-minute technique trains all 3 in a single daily session. Here is the structure. For the first 2 minutes, you speak about a topic you choose freely and you focus only on initiation, starting the topic, giving the essential information, establishing the context. For the next 3 minutes, you develop the topic by adding detail, adding your personal opinion or experience, connecting it to something else you know, asking yourself questions about it and answering them, and exploring it from different angles. For the final 2 minutes, you close the topic, summarize what you have said, offer a concluding opinion or feeling, and transition to what you might talk about next. 7 minutes, 3 movements, every day. Nadia Rousseau, the English teacher from Vancouver, Canada, introduced the 7-minute technique to a group of 12 adult learners in February 2026 and tracked their progress over 6 weeks. At the start of the program, the average speaking time before a significant pause of 5 seconds or more was 14 seconds. After 6 weeks of daily 7-minute practice, the average time before a significant pause had increased to 1 minute and 42 seconds, an increase of more than 700%. The improvement was measured without any additional grammar instruction or vocabulary study. The only variable was the daily speaking practice. Claire Whitfield completed her first 30 days of daily fluency practice in April 2026, and she described the experience of her first real English conversation after the 30 days with a sentence that stayed with me for a long time. She was on a video call with a client from Ireland, and she said, "For the first time in my life, I stopped noticing that I was speaking English. I just spoke. I answered questions. I asked questions back. I told a joke. And I thought afterward, this is what it feels like. This is fluency." That moment, the moment you stop noticing the language and start just living inside it, is what every learner is working toward. 30 days of daily practice. That is the distance between Daniel's 11 seconds of silence and Claire's moment of not noticing. It is smaller than it feels. The most important thing you can do with the information in this episode is not think about it. It is to begin. Today, not tomorrow. Speak English out loud for 5 minutes about anything. About this podcast. About your day. About what you had for lunch. The topic is irrelevant. Your voice is everything. Start now. Today you learned about the production gap, the hidden skill of real-time language production, and the 2 practical methods that build it: the daily fluency practice and the 7-minute technique. You met Daniel, who froze for 11 seconds in a Munich cafe in February 2026. And you met Claire from Adelaide, who 30 days later stopped noticing she was speaking English at all. Both of them are real learners who found the same thing. The gap between knowing English and speaking English is not filled with more study. It is filled with more speaking. The title of this episode promised you the one skill nobody teaches, and that skill is fluency practice, the deliberate daily act of speaking English without stopping, without correcting, without waiting for perfection. Start today. 5 minutes, out loud, forward momentum only. I promise you that the version of yourself who does this every day for 30 days will be a genuinely different English speaker than the version of you listening right now. Different in a way that feels like freedom. And that freedom is worth every imperfect, messy, forward-moving sentence. I will see you in the next episode.